everyone. It is time to talk about the books that I read in February. So this update is a little bit late. It's already middle of March, but I've had kind of a hellish month so far. But I thought I would still go ahead and give you guys an update. So I'm going to throw up on the screen here my stats for February. So on the new stat page that I made, you can see my top 3 books of the month, which I will talk about as I go on. So as you can see, I read 9 books this month and had 1 DNF. And then I had 7 partial reads, so 7 books that I started but didn't finish. My percentage rereads year to date is 9%. My average rating for the month was 4, which is up 0.1 of a point from last month. And I read 8 new authors. So 8 of the 9 were new authors. And then the other one was an author I had read previously. So if we look a little closer at my star ratings, I had 1 5-star, 2 4.5s, 4 4s, 1 3, and 1 that was less than 3. And I'll get into more detail when I tell you about the books. My book types, 7 of them were novels, 1 was a book of short stories, and 1 was nonfiction, which is fairly average for me. And for how I acquired them, 6 of them were library reads, and 3 of them were books that I owned. And then the format of the books that I read 8 of them as physical books, and 1 of them was mixed media, where I listened to the audiobook and read the physical book. So of the 9 books that I read, 2 of them were series reads, and both of those were starting new series, which is kind of funny because my goal this year is to complete and continue series, but I also have been starting some new ones. And then the top genres that I read, I ended up having 2 in each of these: thriller, healing fiction, and dark academia. So that was kind of where my reading was at this past month. So let us talk about the books. So I'll start with just mentioning the partial reads that I did. So there was my DNF, which was a history book. Then I read 36 pages. So the first story of Man Descending by Guy Vanderhaeghe, that was the short story collection that I was going to read this month, and I didn't quite get to. I read 202 pages in Oliver Twist, so I'm about halfway through that. And 68 pages in a nonfiction about aircraft. And then 228 pages in Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. 466 pages in The Arctic Grail by Pierre Berton, which is a huge nonfiction. And then I got to 17% on the audiobook of The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien. So that was my partial reads. So now I thought I would tell you about the books that I read in the order of my least favorite to my most favorite this month. So the first one was my lowest rated one, and that was 2.5 stars, and that was for The Secret History by Donna Tartt. So The Secret History, you're following this guy named Richard, I believe, and he goes to this college out east in the US, and it's a kind of an upper class college, and he gets involved with these other students who are studying Greek from this professor who is kind of a different sort of guy. Like, he takes over all their classes and everything. And then throughout the story, you're following these characters as they essentially kind of descend into madness. But that's kind of the general gist of the story. Now, I know this book is beloved by a lot of people, but I found it the most brutally boring book I have ever read. The characters were so insufferable, and the book was way too long. The only reason why it got more than like maybe a 2-star was because I kind of ended up getting into a bit of a morbid enjoyment watching the train wreck happen at the end of the book. But I really disliked the characters, and I'm coming to realize that not liking the characters is a big deal for me. So that's why that one got 2.5 stars. Next up, the one that I gave 3.5 stars to was a nonfiction. It was called The Menopause Manifesto by Dr. Jen Gunter. Now, this book, I gave it 3.5 because it wasn't like anything super special to me, but it was I liked the conversational way that she talked about menopause and everything. And I thought the book was extremely detailed. This is the one that I also listened to some of the audiobook. And I think I would get more out of it by just reading the physical book. And I found the information really useful. She goes through the whole process of menopause, but from a feminist point of view, and calls out the patriarchy and the way that patriarchal medicine has mistreated women going through menopause. So I found those parts quite interesting. There was a lot of really detailed medical data and things about hormone therapy and all of that, which were just a little bit more than what I needed at this point in what I was reading. So, but it was in general a very good reference book. And so I gave it 3.5 stars. Then I ended up having 4 books that I gave 4 stars to. So the first one was one that you'll see in an upcoming vlog. It was A Question of Loyalty by Barbara Greenwood. This was a book that I read as a child, and it was actually the first book that really got me interested in reading historical fiction. So in this one, you're following a young girl named Deborah, and it takes place in I believe it's like the early 1800s in what became Canada. And you're following Deborah and this young boy named Dan. And Dan is a rebel. It's during a rebel uprising, the Mackenzie Rebellion, I believe is what it was, and in Eastern Canada. And Dan is a rebel, and he gets shot and ends up hiding in Deborah's family's barn. But they're on the other side, and if anybody's caught harboring a rebel, they could have their house burned down and be thrown out. So she has to decide whether she wants to help him or not, and it goes through the general story. So I found this one was a fun nostalgic read for me because, like I say, this was the book that got me into reading historical fiction way back when. And so it was kind of a fun nostalgic read. There were parts of it that were kind of, especially with Deborah's character, that kind of irritated me a little bit, but it is like a middle grade type age range. So, but yeah, it was a fun nostalgic read. Then another 4-star was, let me just see here in my book, The Sanatorium by Sarah Pierce. So I read this one for Polarathon, and I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. You're following Detective Ellen Warner. She gets called by her estranged brother, Isaac, to come and visit him and his fiancée, Lori, at this hotel, newly renovated hotel in I think it's like the Swiss Alps or something like that. But anyways, it used to be a sanatorium. And then right from the beginning, you know that things aren't what they're supposed to be. There's the opening part is disappearance, and then you get into some scenes from the point of view of someone who's been kidnapped, and it just spirals from there. And eventually Lori, the fiance, goes missing. And so Ellen is trying to figure out what's going on. And I found this was like a really good, solid thriller. There were some aspects of it that kind of fell flat for me, but overall, I really, really enjoyed it. I liked the fact that there was good anxiety representation because Ellen, because of some things that she's been through, is struggling with major anxiety issues. And I liked that in here. And Ellen's character really grew on me as the story went. And things just kind of got more and more intense as the story went on. And I really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to reading the second book in that series. It's a trilogy. Then I also read The Full Moon Coffee Shop by Mae Mochizuki. I've been looking forward to this one ever since I first picked it up in January. And I gave it 4 stars. It was a really fun book to read. So this was about this, it's a little coffee shop in Tokyo. Is it in Tokyo? No. Kyoto. It's a little coffee shop in Kyoto, and it's only there on a full moon. And so these people get a random invitation to come to this coffee shop. And when they get there, they discover that the coffee shop is run by sentient cats, who then not only supply them with the desserts and coffee to go with their discussion, but also help them deal with issues in their life. So it starts out, you're following this woman who is a screenwriter who's kind of down on her luck. She used to be really big and then fell out of favor. And she ends up stumbling across the coffee shop, and they help her figure out what to do next with her life. And then from there, you're following other characters they're all kind of related to each other in one way or another. And I really liked the way the story came full circle. You find out about something from the character in the beginning and how they're all connected. And then there's a character at the end that kind of brings it all around and wraps it up neatly, which I really enjoyed. It's very, very heavy on the astrology, obviously, because the cats use astrology in order to help these people. And I don't necessarily believe in that myself, but for the sake of the book, I had no problem suspending my disbelief for that. And it was just in general, just a really fun little book. I enjoyed it. I marked a few things that I thought were really deep, thoughtful things that I enjoyed. So that was that one. And then I also read Days at the Murasaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagasawa. That one was another healing fiction, which I really enjoyed and gave 4 stars. It's another Japanese translation. And in that one, you're following this young woman who she ends up finding out that the guy that she thought she was going to marry is actually engaged to somebody else, and it blows her world apart. So she ends up quitting her job and then getting... she's running out of options, and she ends up getting a call from her uncle who she hasn't seen for a long time. And he invites her to come and help him out at his bookshop and live there for a while she gets back on her feet. So she decides to take him up on the offer and goes, and it's the Murasaki Bookshop. And it's in this area in I believe, now is this one in Tokyo? I can't remember. I'll put it up on the screen. But anyways, it's this area where there's all these used bookstores and very specialized. And I think it sounds like a really cool place to visit. But she starts helping him in the bookshop, and through the things she discovers, she starts reading, and through the things she discovers, she starts to kind of mend her life. And through learning more about her uncle and about her aunt and everything. And I just found it a really heartwarming story, very enjoyable read. I think that healing fiction is my new comfort genre. I have been really enjoying it lately. And then I had 2 4.5 stars. So the first one I'll mention was my number 3 top book on the graphic. And that was Peacocks of Instagram by Deepa Rajagopalan. Now, this was a collection of short stories. It was literary fiction and was one of the books that was nominated for the Giller Prize, which is the largest literary fiction prize in Canada. And it essentially, you're following interconnected people. And you're following people, it's people in Canada, there's some in the US, and there's some of them in India. And it jumps around in time as well, but all the stories are somehow interconnected. Like, say, for example, the woman in the first story is a friend of this woman in like the 5th or 6th story, who is then somebody who had helped this person who's in the 7th story, kind of thing. Like, everybody's kind of interconnected. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Her writing was really good. She was a very interesting writer, and I actually wouldn't mind, I don't read a lot of literary fiction, but I actually wouldn't mind reading a novel or something from her, because her writing really held my attention. I quite enjoyed it. It was a good set of short stories. Then the other 4.5 star that I gave was Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. Now, this one had been my January pick for the Buzzword Readathon, where for a book with the word truth or lie in it. And this one is a thriller. You're following a woman named Lucy, and she has a history with this small town that she grew up in, because when she was, I think it's 5 years before the book began, she and her best friend, Savvy, had been at a wedding, and then they left to go home. And the next morning she was found walking up the road, completely drenched with a head wound, and has no memory of what happened. And then Savvy is found dead. And so the town is divided as to, at first, as to whether she's a victim or if she was the one who actually did it. And eventually the town decides that she did it, even though there's no actual evidence and she has no memory of it. So then she moves to LA, and then a true crime podcaster gets a hold of the story and decides that he's going to look into this story for his second season. And this all of a sudden comes out, and she learns, or people learn who she is, and she ends up losing her job, and things are just going from bad to worse. And then her grandmother phones and essentially blackmails her into coming home for her birthday celebration. But what she really wants is for her to come home when this podcaster is there and talk to him and try and figure out what actually happened, because she believes that Lucy is innocent. She's one of the only ones who believes Lucy is innocent. And I really enjoyed this one. It was, I liked the humorous tone to Lucy's point of view. She was quite sarcastic, and she had grown, like she had spent the last 5 years being treated as the murderer who hadn't gotten caught. So she really was, she kind of embraced that role, even though she doesn't know whether she did it or not. And there were some really deep parts as well that I appreciated. It dealt quite a bit with domestic violence, which I thought was really interesting. And just Lucy's character started out, you kind of aren't sure what to think of her because she's pretty lackadaisical about the whole thing, but she actually ends up being a fairly deep character. And I found that there were some interesting things to do with her mental health and everything as well. And just overall, I really enjoyed the read, and the twist at the end got me. I didn't figure out who it was. It wasn't the person that I thought. So that always helps when it's a thriller. But yeah, I really ended up enjoying that one and giving it 4.5 stars. And then the final book that is on my list is the best one of the month, the only 5-star read that I had this month. And that was If We Were Villains by ML Rio. Now, I was not expecting to really like this one because I hadn't been overly enjoying Dark Academia so far. But I went ahead and I read it, and you're following this troupe of actors that are at this college. And so they're in their 4th year and final year at the college, and they've been studying Shakespeare. They're Shakespearean actors. And where you're actually following the story is it's actually 10 years later, and our main character has just gotten out of prison where he went for having killed one of the other members of the troupe. But the detective who was looking into it doesn't really believe that he was guilty, but he's retired now. And so he goes to talk to our main character, and off the record kind of thing, gets him to finally tell him what actually happened. And so you're going back in time through our main character. I can't remember what his name was. Anyways, you're going back in time through his memories of the event and following along with that. And the reason why I liked this one so much more than the other ones was because the characters were really likable. Like the person who ended up dying was not that likable, but our main character, and there was a couple of the other characters that I actually really liked. And that makes the hugest difference for me. So I enjoyed following them, and the ending just got my heart. Like, oh my God. I was just like, it was sitting at about 4.5 star until that point. And then I was just like, oh, my heart. So, and the ending was just ambiguous enough to give you a little bit of I wonder. So I did really end up enjoying that one, and I do want to buy it. It was a good one. And so that was my top book of the month. So that basically covers everything I did in February. I will put a link in the description to my Polarathon vlogs. I'm going to be posting the final week up here shortly, because I didn't get a chance to post it yet. But I was doing Polarathon during the month, so a lot of the books that I was reading were for that. And there was a couple that I didn't quite finish at the end of the month, but I just carried it over for a couple days into March to finish my Polarathon stuff. So, but that was kind of the 9 that I finished anyways, and the other ones I'll tell you more about next at the end of March. So I hope you enjoyed this update, and let me know if you've read any of these books or if any of them are on your TBR and you're really excited about them. And yeah, let me know down in the comments, and I will see you guys soon on my next video. Don't forget to give me a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you soon. Bye.